Hey everybody, today on the Daily Dose, we're continuing a conversation about a question I think all of us ponder from time to time, and that question is this. What do I do when it feels as though my faith is falling apart? When it feels like the very foundation of my faith, the things I've come to learn and to know about God and the church and Christian faith, what happens when it feels as though they're falling apart? And specifically today, I want to wonder, how do I re-find my faith? What is the first step in trying to re-find my faith when it seems like it's all falling apart? To get into that, I want to talk about a friend of mine. He bought a house in downtown Minneapolis, and it was a rundown, beat-up, dilapidated house. He and his wife were going to tear the house down and build their dream house in this quaint little neighborhood. Well, they hired a contractor. The contractor came in, demolished the house, but the contractor found something that would put the whole project on pause. You see, here's what he found. He found under the floor of the garage, one of the previous owners of the house at one time had installed a giant pool. It was this deep, a sort of water tank that was about 15 feet wide and about 30 feet deep. Well, my friend, he went and he asked the neighbors about the previous owners of the house, and one of the neighbors told a story about how some 20, 30 years ago, the owner of that house, guess what he did for a living? He was a scuba instructor. And so what did he do? He had a company come in and put a scuba tank in his garage, people. You can't make this up. The subsequent owner had filled it with sand and put a garage floor over it. Well, in order to build this dream house, they had to make sure the foundation was secure. And so they had to end up filling portions of this giant scuba tank with concrete. They had to reimagine the architecture to put the footings to the house in just the right spot so they could build the house over this giant concrete tank that was stuck in the ground. You see, you want to sort of re-find your faith. When it feels like your faith is falling apart, I want to suggest that it starts with examining what the foundation of your faith is. What's your faith built on? In the book of Matthew chapter 7, we hear a great image that Jesus shares about the sorts of foundation that many of us build our faith on. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, it begins, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on," say it, "on the rock. The rains came and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had a foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash." What is Jesus saying here? He's suggesting that for all of us, we have the option to build our faith on sand or on the rock, on a solid foundation or on something that will inevitably crumble under our feet. Here's what I think. Many of us, maybe some of you who grew up in the church, sometimes the faith that was handed on to us, it had a foundation that was rather sandy. And I want to talk about 3 sandy foundations that too often, many of us, we build our faith on. The first is fear. For many of us, we're taught that we should be afraid of God. That God is always disappointed with us, that somehow we've got to live our lives trying to please God, and that God sees every one of our blunders and we're just a big mess up for God. Some of us even see God as sort of an angry Santa Claus. He's making his list, checking it twice, and here's what we believe. We're never good enough for this God. We don't even make God's list. You see, nothing could be further from the truth. The God that we hear about in the Bible, if you actually read your Bible, you find out this God is all about love. I mean, this God is the most loving parent we could imagine. I mean, think about it. Even when your kids do something wrong, do you stop loving them? No, you love them more because you want to help them, right? That's how God is. I mean, think about this. When it comes to God, if God slept at night, God would wake up every morning and you'd be the first thing on this God's mind. If God had a fridge, your face would be on God's fridge, your picture. You see, God's not mad at you. God's madly in love with you. The first foundation that many of us build our faith on is this idea that we should fear God. The second foundation, that's sandy soil. And it's a foundation way too many of us build our faith on. It's this idea that followers of Jesus should look and act a certain way. That there's sort of a caricature of what a follower of Jesus should look like. Some of you believe that if you're a follower of Jesus, you should vote a certain way. You should live a certain kind of lifestyle. Some, even way back when, believed that if you were a Christian, you would dress a certain way. You'd behave a certain way. Some of you, we need to examine. Do you have a belief that suggests that Christians, should be of a certain race and a certain class? That's the second sandy soil that many of us, we build our faith on. The third one is a sort of relativism. It's this idea that God is just sort of one of many gods. Jesus is one of many. But for us who call ourselves Christian, in 1 John chapter 4, it says that this God is love incarnate. That this God isn't just a sort of moral guru of sorts. That this God is the God who came as love, who broke into this world and died on a cross for people like you and people like me. You see, what do you do when it feels like your faith is falling apart? What's the first step to refinding your faith? I want to invite you to examine the foundations of your faith. Is it on rock or is it on a sandy soil? Folks, thanks for tuning in today. So grateful. Please, if you're watching on Facebook, share this with folks. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the bell so you get notifications. If you're watching on Cable Access 181, why don't you invite a friend to watch with you tomorrow?